"Who are you dating?" he asked, and it wasn't really a question. The door clicked shut behind me with a soft, final sound that echoed louder than it should have in the empty office, and suddenly the air felt thinner, heavier, like the room itself had decided to take his side. I didn't turn around right away. I didn't have to. I could feel him there. Victor Hale didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. At 65, he carried authority the way other men carried wallets, always present, always within reach. I tightened my grip on my bag, my pulse picking up for reasons I didn't want to examine too closely. "It's none of your business," I said, aiming for calm, for professional, for anything that would put distance back between us. It didn't work. His footsteps were slow. Measured. Each one deliberate against the polished marble floor. I counted them without meaning to. 1, 2, 3. Then he stopped. Too close. "You work for me," he said quietly. "Everything about you is my business." The words should have sounded ridiculous. Controlling. Out of line. And they were. But the way he said them, low, steady, certain, made them land differently. Like a rule that had always existed, whether I agreed to it or not. I turned then, forcing myself to meet his eyes. Big mistake. His gaze wasn't angry. That would have been easier. Anger burns fast. This was something colder. Something that had been building long before this moment. "I answer your calls. I run your schedule. That's it," I said. "You don't get to ask me who I see outside this office." His jaw tightened. Just slightly. Most people wouldn't have noticed. I did. I always noticed things about him I wished I didn't. "Outside," he repeated, like he was testing the word. Then a faint, humorless smile touched his lips. "You think there's an outside?" My stomach dropped, though I couldn't explain why. I shifted my weight, trying to create space, but my back met the cool surface of the wall before I realized how far I'd stepped. He didn't touch me. Not yet. But he didn't have to. The space between us shrank anyway, filled with something unspoken and impossible to ignore. "You've been distracted," he continued. "Late. Responses. Missed details. That's not like you, Emily." My name sounded different coming from him tonight. Not professional. Not distant. Possessive in a way that made my chest tighten. "I've been busy," I said. "People have lives, Mr. Hale." His eyes flicked down for a second. To my phone. To the screen that had lit up earlier with a name he didn't recognize. That was it. That was all it took. When he looked back at me, something had shifted. Not louder. Not sharper. Just, decided. "Answer me," he said. Not raised. Not forced. Final. I swallowed, hating that my body reacted before my mind could catch up. "Why does it matter?" I asked. And for a moment, just a moment, I thought he might actually tell me the truth. But Victor Hale didn't explain himself. He didn't justify. He acted. He stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the warmth of him, close enough that the rest of the room disappeared entirely, and when he spoke again, his voice dropped to something almost quiet enough to miss. "Because I don't share what's mine. I should have stepped away." That was the first thought that came, sharp and clear, cutting through the silence that followed his words, but my feet stayed where they were, pressed into the marble like they had chosen him over me without asking for permission, and I hated that. I hated the way my pulse betrayed me, the way my breath came just a little too fast, the way his presence filled every inch of space until there was nowhere left to go except straight through him, which was not an option, not with a man like Victor. Hale standing inches away, looking at me like I was something he had already decided on, something already claimed, something already his. "You do not get to decide that," I said, quieter this time, not weaker, just, careful, because pushing him felt dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with raised voices or sudden movements and everything to do with how controlled he was, how precise, how certain, his head tilted slightly, studying me like he was memorizing every reaction, every flicker of hesitation I tried to hide. I already did, he replied, and it was not arrogance, not exactly, it was certainty, the kind that did not need approval, the kind that existed long before I walked into his office 3 years ago and accepted a job that paid more than anything I had ever seen, more than enough to ignore the warnings, the rumors, the quiet way people lowered their voices when they said his name. I had told myself it was just business, just numbers, just schedules and meetings and contracts, nothing more. I had built rules around that belief. Strict ones, clear ones, and the most important rule was distance. Always distance, never personal, never emotional, never his, and now he was standing here tearing through every one of those rules like they were nothing more than paper. You are crossing a line, I said, forcing the words out, holding his gaze even when it felt like stepping into something I could not control. His eyes darkened just slightly, not anger, not yet, something else, something deeper. There was never a line, he said, and that should not have made sense, it should have sounded insane, but the way he said it made it feel like the truth had been sitting there all along and I was the only one who had not seen it. I shook my head, more to steady myself than to argue. I have a life outside of this office, I insisted, and this time there was no hesitation, no softening, just truth, because I needed something solid to hold on to, something that belonged to me and not him. His gaze dropped again, slower this time, deliberate, to my hand where my phone rested, silent now, but not forgotten, the name that had flashed across the screen earlier still hanging between us like a challenge, like a threat, like proof that I was not as separate as I claimed to be. His fingers moved then, not fast, not forceful, just enough to tilt my chin upward when I tried to look away, and the gesture was controlled, almost gentle, but it stole my breath anyway. Then why does it feel like you are lying to me? He asked quietly, and that was the moment everything shifted, because it was not the question, it was the assumption behind it, the belief that I owed him the truth in the first place, that I owed him anything at all. My chest tightened, anger rising now, real and sharp and finally strong enough to push back against whatever hold he thought he had. I do not owe you anything, I said, each word steady, deliberate, and for the first time since he walked in, something flickered in his expression, not surprise, not quite, but something close to resistance, like I had just challenged a rule he had never had to defend before. The silence stretched, heavy and charged, and then he stepped back, just one step, but it felt like the entire room shifted with it, like gravity itself had adjusted. His hand dropped, his gaze still locked on mine, unreadable now, dangerous in a quieter way. We will see, he said, and it was not a threat, not spoken like one, but it settled in my chest all the same, heavy and certain and impossible to ignore. And as he turned slightly, as if the conversation was over, as if he had already decided the outcome, I realized something that made my stomach drop. This was not finished, not even close, and whatever line I thought existed between us had just disappeared completely. I did not sleep that night, not really. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying every second over and over like my mind was trying to rewrite something that had already happened, something that could not be undone. And the worst part was not what he said, it was how he said it, calm, certain, like the outcome had never been in question, like I had just been catching up to a decision he made a long time ago. I checked my phone more times than I wanted to admit, the message still there. Still simple, still normal, a dinner plan, a time, a place, something that belonged to a version of my life that suddenly felt far away, like it belonged to someone else. Someone who did not work 12 hours a day in a building where power moved quietly behind closed doors, someone who did not have a man like Victor Hale watching her like she was part of his world whether she agreed or not. I almost cancelled, my thumb hovering over the screen, the words forming and disappearing 3 times. Before I locked the phone and set it down, no, I was not going to let him take that too. I had already given up enough without realizing it. Mornings blurred into routine the way they always did, coffee, emails, schedules, everything exactly where it should be, except it was not anymore, because I felt it before I saw him, the shift in the room, the subtle tightening of space, the way conversations lowered half a note when he passed by. Victor Hale walked into the office like nothing had happened, like last night had not cracked something open between us. Like I had not stood there against a wall realizing how easily control could slip. "Good morning, Emily," he said, and his voice was the same, smooth, composed, but it landed differently now, heavier. I nodded, keeping my eyes on the tablet in my hand. "Your 10 o'clock has been moved to 11, I said, professional, steady, the way I had always been, the way I needed to be, because if I slipped even a little, I was not sure I would get that distance back. He did not respond right away. Silence stretching just long enough to make me aware of it, and then, "Cancel it," he said. I frowned slightly, looking up before I could stop myself. "You have been waiting 2 weeks for that meeting," I reminded him, practical, logical, safe territory. His gaze held mine, unreadable. "Cancel it," he repeated, and something in the way he said it told me this was not about business. Not really. I hesitated, just a second, but he noticed. He always noticed. His eyes flicked briefly to my phone resting on the desk, then back to me, and I understood, not fully, not completely, but enough to feel the weight of it, enough to know this was not random, not impulsive. This was him adjusting the pieces, shifting things into place. My chest tightened, irritation rising. "I have plans tonight," I said before I could stop myself, and there it was, the smallest crack in my control. His expression did not change, but the room did, the air pressing in again, familiar now in a way that made me uneasy. "Do you?" he said softly. Not a question, not curiosity, just acknowledgement, like he had already accounted for that too. I straightened slightly, forcing my voice to stay even. "Yes," I said, "I do," and for a moment, neither of us moved, neither of us looked away, and it felt like standing on the edge of something I could not see the bottom of. Then he nodded once, slow, deliberate, like he had just confirmed something in his own mind. "Then we will adjust your schedule," he said, turning slightly as if the conversation was over, as if that was all this was, routine, normal, controlled, but it was not. I could feel it in the way my pulse refused to settle, in the way his presence lingered even after he stepped away, and as I picked up my phone again, as I looked at the simple message waiting for me, I realized something that made my stomach drop all over again. This was not about one night, not about one question, not about one moment of jealousy. This was a shift, a quiet, irreversible shift, and I was already inside it whether I wanted to be or not. I told myself I would go anyway, that whatever invisible line he thought he could draw around my life did not exist unless I allowed it to, and I refused to allow it, not without a fight, not without reminding myself who I was before this job. Before his voice started lingering in my head long after he left the room. The restaurant was 12 blocks from my apartment. A small place with warm lighting and the kind of quiet music that made conversations feel private, normal, safe. I arrived 5 minutes early, intentionally, needing the extra time to steady myself, to breathe, to prove that I could still exist outside of his world, outside of his control. Daniel was already there when I walked in, standing as soon as he saw me, smiling in a way that felt easy, uncomplicated, everything Victor Hale was not. "Hey," he said, pulling out my chair, "I was not sure you would make it." I forced a small smile, sliding into the seat. "I almost did not," I admitted, honesty slipping out before I could filter it. He studied me for a second, concern flickering across his face. "Everything okay at work?" he asked. Simple question, simple answer, except nothing about it felt simple anymore. I nodded quickly, reaching for the menu. "Just a long day," I said, deflecting, because explaining Victor Hale was not something you did over dinner like it was office gossip. You did not explain a man like him at all. Not if you were smart, not if you wanted to keep your life separate. The conversation moved forward, light, normal, safe. He talked about his new project. I responded. I laughed at the right moments. I did everything I was supposed to do, everything that should have made this feel real, but there was a weight sitting just beneath the surface, something I could not shake, like a shadow that followed me into the room and refused to leave. My phone buzzed once against the table, soft but unmistakable. I froze for half a second before picking it up, the screen lighting up with a single message, no name, just a number I did not need saved to recognize. "I know where you are." My breath caught, sharp and sudden, the noise of the restaurant fading just slightly as the words settled in, not loud, not threatening, just there, like a statement of fact, like something obvious, my fingers tightened around the phone. I told myself not to react, not to let it show, but Daniel noticed. "Anyway, everything all right?" he asked, leaning forward slightly, concern returning. I locked the screen quickly, placing the phone face down on the table. "Yeah," I said, too fast, too controlled, "just work." The lie tasted different now, heavier, because it was not entirely a lie. Victor Hale was work, technically, but he was not supposed to follow me here. He was not supposed to reach into this part of my life like it belonged to him too. I tried to focus, to pull myself back into the moment, but my attention kept drifting. Every time the door opened, every time footsteps passed too close to our table, my pulse picked up again, anticipation and something else I did not want to name building quietly in my chest. Daniel said something else, something I should have heard, but I missed it, my mind somewhere else entirely, somewhere darker, more controlled, more certain, and then my phone buzzed again, slower this time. Deliberate. I should not have looked, I knew that, but I did. Anyway, one new message, simple, precise. "I told you we would adjust your schedule." I stared at the screen, the words blurring slightly as something cold settled in my chest. Not fear, not exactly, something sharper. Something more complicated, because this was not just control, this was presence, this was him reminding me that distance did not mean anything unless he allowed it to, and for the first time since I sat down, I realized something that made everything else feel suddenly fragile. I was not just being watched, I was being repositioned, quietly, carefully, like a piece on a board I did not even realize I was standing on. And the worst part was not that he could reach me here, it was that a part of me had expected it. I should have left right then, I know that now, but I stayed, sitting across from Daniel like everything was still normal, like the messages on my phone had not shifted something fundamental in the air around me, like I could still pretend that my life existed in clean, separate lines, work on one side, everything else on the other, but the truth was already there, bleeding through, quiet and undeniable. "You are not really here, are you?" Daniel said, his voice pulling me back just enough to meet his eyes, and I realized I had not responded to anything he said for the last 30 seconds, maybe longer. I forced a breath, straightening slightly. I am sorry, it has just been a long day," I repeated, the same excuse, the same shield, except it felt thinner now, like it could break if he pushed even a little harder. He studied me for a moment, then nodded, not convinced, but not pressing either. "We can take it easy," he said, offering a small smile, "no pressure tonight," and that should have made things better, easier, but instead it made something twist in my chest, because this was what normal felt like, this was what choice felt like, and I was sitting here thinking about a man who did not believe in either. My phone stayed face down on the table, but I could feel it, like it had its own gravity now, pulling my attention back every few seconds. I did not need to check it again to know there would be another message. There always was, precise, controlled, timed. In a way that made it clear he was not guessing, he was watching. The realization settled deeper, heavier, and for the first time, irritation pushed past the unease, sharp and steady. No, this was not acceptable, this was not something I was going to quietly adapt to. I reached for my phone, flipping it over with more force than necessary, ignoring the flicker of concern on Daniel's face, and opened the message thread again. One more notification waiting, as expected, one line. Simple, deliberate, leave. I stared at the word, my pulse kicking up again, not fear this time, something closer to defiance. He was not here, he was not standing in front of me, he did not get to decide this, not from a distance, not like this. I exhaled slowly, locking the screen, placing the phone back down with careful precision, and then I looked at Daniel, really looked at him, at the normalcy of him, the ease, the absence of control. "Tell me about your project again," I said, my voice steadier now, more intentional, and he blinked slightly, surprised, but then he smiled, picking up where he left off. "And for a few minutes, it worked." I listened, I asked questions, I stayed present, I held my ground, until the shift came, subtle at first, almost nothing, the restaurant door opening again, a small change in the flow of movement, the kind of thing most people would not notice, but I did. My body reacting before my mind could catch up, my shoulders tightening, my breath catching just slightly. I did not turn right away, I did not want to, because I already knew, not logically, not with proof, but with certainty, the kind that had been building since the first message. Slow and inevitable, Daniel kept talking, unaware, and I forced myself to stay still, to stay focused, but it was useless. The presence moved through the room without sound, without urgency, but with impact, the way everything seemed to adjust around it, conversations dipping just slightly, attention shifting without anyone fully realizing why, and then I felt it, that familiar weight, that quiet pressure that had nothing to do with proximity and everything to do with attention. My fingers curled slightly against the edge of the table, and I finally turned, slow, controlled, because if I rushed, if I reacted, I would be giving him exactly what he wanted. Victor Hale stood near the entrance, composed as ever, perfectly at ease in a space that had nothing to do with him, his gaze already on me, not searching, not scanning, just there, like it had been from the beginning, like it had never left, and in that moment, everything became clear in a way that made my chest tighten. This was not about stopping me, not really, this was about reminding me that wherever I went, whatever I tried to separate, he could follow, not loudly, not forcefully, just enough to make sure I understood. I was not outside his world, not anymore, and as his eyes held mine from across the room, steady, certain, I realized something that made resisting feel suddenly more complicated than I wanted to admit. He had not come here to take me away, he had come to make sure I chose to leave. I should have looked away, I should have turned back to Daniel and finished the conversation like nothing had changed, like the man standing across the room did not have the ability to shift the entire atmosphere without saying a single word, but I did not. I held his gaze, and that was my first mistake, because Victor Hale did not chase reactions, he waited for them, he let you come to him in ways you did not even realize. And now I was the one caught in that invisible pull. Daniel followed my line of sight after a second, curiosity replacing the easy calm that had been there moments ago. "Do you know him?" he asked, his voice low, careful, and I hesitated, just long enough to answer the question without speaking. "He is my boss," I said finally, the word sounding too small, too simple for what Victor Hale actually was. Daniel nodded slowly, glancing back again. "He looks like he owns the place," he said with a half smile, trying to make it lighter than it felt. I almost said something back, something normal, something that would pull this moment back into something manageable, but then Victor moved, not quickly, not dramatically, just one step forward, then another, controlled, precise, and suddenly the distance between us did not feel like distance at all. My fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the table, grounding myself in something physical, something real. Daniel shifted in his seat, sensing the change now, even if he did not understand it. "Do you need to go talk to him?" he asked, and there it was, the choice, simple on the surface, complicated underneath. I could stay, I could ignore it, pretend that this was still my space, my time, my decision, or I could acknowledge what had already been set in motion the second Victor stepped into the room. I exhaled slowly, steadying myself. "No," I said, firm this time, more to myself than to him, "I do not," and for a moment, I believed it, I really did, because I stayed, I did not move, I did not look back. I forced my attention onto Daniel, onto the conversation, onto anything that was not the quiet presence approaching from across the room. But belief and reality were not the same thing, not here, not with him. The shift came again, closer now, undeniable, until it stopped just beside the table, not behind me, not in front of me, beside me, close enough that I could feel the change in the air without even turning. Daniel went still, his posture tightening instinctively, his awareness catching up all at once, and then Victor spoke, his voice calm, measured, carrying just enough to reach both of us without drawing attention from anyone else. "Emily," he said, and hearing my name like that, here, in this place that was supposed to be mine, sent something sharp through my chest. I turned slowly, refusing to rush, refusing to let him see anything but control, even if it was slipping just beneath the surface. "Mr. Hale," I replied, matching his tone, professional, distant, a line drawn in words if not in space. His eyes held mine for a second, unreadable as ever, then shifted briefly to Daniel, not dismissive, not aggressive, just assessing, like he was cataloging a detail that did not quite fit where it was. "I need a moment," Victor said, returning his attention to me, and it was not a request, it was never a request. Daniel looked between us, uncertainty clear now, but also something else, respect. Maybe, or instinct, the kind that told him this was not a situation he fully understood. It is okay, I said quickly, standing before the silence stretched any further, before Victor had to say anything else, because I knew he would, and I did not want to find out what that would sound like in a place like this. I stepped away from the table, my heart beating faster now, not because I was afraid, not exactly, but because I knew this moment mattered more than it should, because stepping toward him felt like confirming something I had been trying to deny all night. We moved a few steps away, just enough for privacy without drawing attention, and then I stopped, turning to face him fully, lifting my chin slightly, holding on to whatever control I still had. This is not appropriate, I said quietly, the word steady even if everything else felt less certain. Victor watched me for a second, then another, like he was measuring something, calculating, and when he finally spoke, his voice dropped just enough to make the space between us feel smaller again, more contained, more his than mine. Neither is ignoring me, he said, and the simplicity of it, the quiet certainty, made something in my chest tighten all over again, because he was not arguing, he was not explaining, he was reminding me of something I was not ready to accept, and as I stood there, just a few feet away from the life I had tried to hold on to, I realized that this was no longer about where I was sitting or who I was with, it was about who I was becoming in a world where he had already decided I belonged. You do not get to decide when I answer you, I said, and this time there was no softness left in my voice, no hesitation to hide behind, just a steady line drawn between us that I refused to let him cross again, not here, not in front of the one part of my life that still felt like mine. Victor did not react immediately, he never did, that was what made it worse, the way he absorbed resistance like it was expected, like it was already accounted for. His gaze did not leave mine, not even for a second, and I could feel the weight of it, pressing, testing, waiting for me to break first. You walked away, he said quietly, like he was correcting a detail rather than confronting me. I allowed you to, I replied, the words sharper than I intended, but I did not take them back, could not take them back, not after everything that had already shifted tonight. His expression changed then, just slightly, not anger, not frustration, something closer to recognition, like he had finally reached the point he was waiting for, the moment where I stopped pretending this was normal, where I stopped playing by rules that only protected me if he respected them, and he did not really. Not anymore. You think this is about permission, he said, his voice lower now, controlled but heavier, like each word carried more weight than before. I held my ground, even when every instinct told me to step back, to create space, to regain something that was already slipping through my fingers. It is about boundaries, I said, each word deliberate, clear, and you are crossing them. The silence that followed stretched just long enough to make my pulse pick up again, but I did not look away. I would not give him that, not now, not when this was the only thing I had left to hold on to. His eyes searched mine, not aggressively, not forcefully, just thoroughly, like he was trying to understand something he did not encounter often, resistance that did not fold under pressure. You came here, he said finally, and it sounded simple, but it was not. It carried something underneath it, something I could not ignore. Yes, I answered, not backing down, not softening. I did. He nodded once, slow, deliberate, like he was confirming a fact, not questioning it. With him, he added, his gaze flicking briefly toward Daniel, still seated at the table, watching us now with attention he could not hide, then back to me, and there it was again, that shift, that quiet tightening in the air, not loud, not explosive, just controlled and certain. That is where you are wrong, Victor continued, his voice barely above a whisper, but it landed harder than anything he had said so far. My chest tightened, confusion and irritation mixing into something sharper. What does that even mean? I asked, frustration slipping through despite my efforts to stay composed. He stepped closer then, not enough to trap me, not enough to force anything, just enough to remind me how easily he could if he chose to, and that was the problem, the choice, always the choice. His eyes held mine, steady, unyielding. It means you think this is separate, he said, and I felt something in my stomach drop before I even understood why. Work. Life. Him. Me. Each word spaced, precise, like he was laying them out in front of me, dismantling something I had built carefully over time. It is not, he finished, and there was no anger in it, no threat, just certainty, the kind that did not need to be proven because it already was. I shook my head slightly, more instinct than logic. You do not get to decide that, I said again, quieter now, but no less firm, because if I let that idea settle, even for a second, everything else would follow. Everything I had tried to protect would collapse under the weight of it. Victor watched me for a long moment, and for the first time, I saw something else there, not softness, not doubt, but something close to patience, like he was not expecting me to understand yet, like this was only the beginning of something he had already accepted. I already have, he said finally, and the way he said it made my breath catch, not because it was louder, but because it was final, because it sounded like a truth he had been living with long before I realized I was part of it. The noise of the restaurant crept back in around us, distant, muted, like we were standing in a space separate from everything else, and as I looked at him, really looked at him, I realized something that made everything inside me shift all over again. This was not about control in the way I understood it. This was not about forcing me into something against my will. This was about something more dangerous, something quieter. Something that did not need force to exist, because in his mind, it already did, and the longer I stood there, the harder it became to tell where my resistance ended and his certainty began. I should have walked away first, I realize that now, because staying there, standing in front of him while the rest of my life waited only a few feet behind me, felt like standing between two versions of myself that could not exist at the same time, and the longer I stayed, the harder it became to remember which one I was supposed to choose. This is not your decision, I said again, quieter this time, not because I was unsure, but because something in his presence demanded a different kind of strength, not loud, not reactive, just steady, rooted, something that did not give him anything to push against. Victor did not move, but his attention sharpened, like I had just stepped into a space he recognized. Something closer to equal footing than he expected, and for a second, just a second, the tension between us shifted, not gone, never gone, but different, more contained, more deliberate. Then make one, he said, and that was new, not a command, not a declaration, an opening, small, controlled, but real. My breath caught slightly, because that was the one thing I had been trying to hold on to all night. Choice, my choice, not his. Not something shaped quietly around me until I no longer recognized it. I glanced back toward the table without meaning to. Daniel was still there, watching, not intruding, not interrupting, but waiting, and the sight of him grounded me in a way nothing else had. Simple, clear, uncomplicated. I turned back to Victor, lifting my chin slightly, holding on to that clarity. I am staying, I said, the words landing solid between us, not defensive, not reactive, just truth. His gaze did not break, but something shifted behind it, not surprise. He did not seem like a man who was surprised often, something more subtle, like recalibration, like he was adjusting to a move he had anticipated but not fully believed I would make. The silence stretched again, but this time it felt different, less like pressure, more like assessment, and then he nodded, once, slow, deliberate. For now, he said, and the addition of those two words should not have mattered, but they did, because they carried weight, time, inevitability, like this moment was temporary in a way I could not control. Irritation flared again, sharper this time. No, I said immediately, stepping back half an inch, reclaiming space. Not for now, Victor. I am staying because I chose to. His name slipped out before I could stop it, and the effect was immediate, subtle but undeniable. His eyes darkened slightly, not in anger, not in offense, but in recognition, like I had just crossed a line in the opposite direction, one that shifted the balance between us just as much as anything he had done. Neither of us spoke for a second, the air tightening again, but not the same as before. This was not him closing in. This was something else, something that felt dangerously close to understanding. Then stay, he said finally, and this time it sounded different, less like a challenge, more like acceptance, but not surrender. Never surrender. Victor Hale did not surrender. He adapted, he adjusted, and that realization sent a quiet warning through my chest, because if he was adjusting, that meant this was not over, not even close. I nodded once, not trusting myself to say anything else, and turned back toward the table. Each step measured, controlled, like I was walking away from something that had not actually released me. I sat down across from Daniel again, forcing a small smile, forcing normalcy back into place. "Sorry about that," I said, my voice steady enough to pass, even if it did not feel real. He studied me for a moment, searching for something, maybe an explanation, maybe reassurance, and I held his gaze, giving him just enough to continue, just enough to keep this part of my life intact. But as the conversation picked up again, as the noise of the restaurant filled the space around us, I could still feel it, that quiet presence lingering at the edge of everything, not gone, not distant, just waiting. And when I allowed myself one brief glance across the room, I saw him exactly where I expected, watching, not interrupting, not approaching again, just there, like he had proven his point without needing to say anything else. And that was when it settled in fully, not as fear, not even as resistance, but as something more complicated, something harder to define. This was not a moment that would fade, not something I could leave behind when the night ended. This was the beginning of something that had already decided it was not temporary, whether I accepted it or not. The rest of the night moved forward like nothing had changed, like the quiet shift that had taken place beneath the surface was something only I could feel, something only I had to carry. Daniel kept talking, steady, patient, giving me space without asking questions he knew I would not answer, and I tried, I really did. I stayed present, I listened, I responded, I even laughed once, soft and brief. Enough to convince both of us that this was still real, still intact, but every few minutes, without meaning to, my eyes drifted, just slightly, just enough to confirm what I already knew. He was still there, not moving, not interrupting, just watching with that same quiet certainty that had followed me all night. And the strangest part was not his presence, it was mine, the way I was aware of him even when I tried not to be, the way something inside me had adjusted to it without permission. Like a part of me had already accepted that this was no longer something I could ignore. When dinner finally ended, the bill paid, chairs pushed back, the moment I had been delaying arrived without warning. "Can I walk you home?" Daniel asked, standing beside me, his voice careful, measured, like he knew the answer might matter more than it should. I hesitated, not because of him, but because I could feel it again, that shift, that awareness, that presence that had not left even once. "I am okay," I said gently, offering a small smile that felt more real this time, not forced, just different. "It is only a few blocks," he nodded, not pushing, not insisting, just accepting, and that made it harder in a way I did not expect, because this was what normal looked like, what respect felt like, what choice was supposed to be. We stepped outside together, the cool night air hitting my skin, grounding me for a moment, the city quieter now, softer, lights reflecting off the pavement in long, steady lines. Daniel lingered for a second, like he wanted to say something else, something that might bridge the distance he felt but could not name. "Text me when you get home," he said finally, simple, easy, and I nodded. "I will," I promised, and for a second, I meant it. I watched him walk away, his figure disappearing into the flow of the street, and only then did I turn. Only then did I allow myself to acknowledge what I had been avoiding since the moment I stepped outside. He was there, of course he was, leaning slightly against the black car parked at the curb, composed, still, like he had been there the entire time, like this had always been where the night would end. My pulse picked up again, not sudden, not sharp, just steady, like it was catching up to something inevitable. I walked toward him slowly, each step deliberate, because rushing would mean something, and I was not ready to admit what that might be. He straightened as I approached, his gaze meeting mine without hesitation, without apology. "You stayed," he said, his voice low, calm, not questioning, just acknowledging. I stopped a few feet away, holding his gaze, refusing to let the distance close any further. "Not yet. I told you I would," I replied, steady, controlled, and for a moment, neither of us moved, the city noise fading into the background again, leaving just the space between us, familiar now in a way that unsettled me more than anything else had tonight. He nodded once, slow, like he had expected nothing less, and yet, he said quietly, his eyes searching mine in that same deliberate way, "You came back." The words landed differently than I expected, not as a challenge, not as a claim, but as something closer to truth. And that was the problem, because I had walked away. I had chosen to stay, I had held on to that part of my life as tightly as I could, and still, I was standing here now, in front of him, not forced, not pulled, just Here, I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of that realization settle in, heavier than anything else he had said tonight. I am going home, I said finally, not answering his statement, not denying it either, just drawing a line where I could. His gaze held mine for a second longer, then he stepped aside, not blocking my path, not stopping me, just moving enough to let me pass, and that simple action, that quiet permission, felt more significant than anything else had, because it was not control, not in the way I understood it, it was something else, something that made the choice feel real and inevitable at the same time. I walked past him, steady, controlled, not looking back, not until I reached the corner, and even then, it was just a glance, brief, instinctive. He was still there, watching, not following, not calling out, just present, like he always had been, like he always would be. And as I turned away again, continuing down the street toward a place that suddenly felt less separate than it used to, one thought settled in my mind with quiet clarity. I had spent the entire night trying to prove that I was outside his world, but the truth was, I had already stepped into it, and walking away did not mean I had left.